Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot. We have a special today. We're ending out the month of July with an extra show. And today we have Dr. Paul COTTRELL with us. And, gee, I've misplaced your bio.
That's okay. I'm misplaced all the time.
I will give it as I recall it. You have a degree in economics, and you have done work in chaos theory and in transhumanism, and you went back to school after that to become a medical doctor. And you have work out that I dug up about endocrinology. So, folks, this is a man you should be impressed by before he opens his mouth. So, he has a show on Global Enlightenment Radio Network where I am a host, and he just came off of a 2-hour show with Leo Zakami. So he's one of the pros, and I would like to welcome him to my show.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now, so my PhD was in finance, not in economics, but it's close.
Okay, close.
Very close.
Well, I didn't find what the actual degree was in, but I kept finding this repeat of the same bio that was on Amazon, where his books are, by the way.
Yeah.
But they're all in Kindle. And I have this personal thing about Kindle after they deleted my copy of 1984.
Well, actually, I do sell on the iBooks store with Apple. Okay. It's not just the Kindle, and then on my website I also sell my books that they can download. But yeah, I mean, I did a lot of pre-dissertation writing about finance and developmental economics, and then my dissertation was on algorithmic trading, and some of my postdoctoral work was dealing with graphing the market in 3 dimensions and doing predictive analysis on market movements using this topographical finance. And then from there,
that's important work. And for folks like me, because I'm in my 60s, when I was in college, if you did computer science, which was part of the mathematics department, not a separate finance department, you did COBOL and Fortran.
Right.
And you probably have never heard of them because COBOL was replaced by C++, and Fortran is still in use in sciences.
Right.
So
in the engineering program, we were exposed to Fortran in the 90s, early 90s. Yeah, I mean, computer programming has evolved over time, and there's so many different codes, most of my dissertation work was developed in MATLAB. So, I coded everything in MATLAB and then ran the algorithms, these trading algorithms to do predictive analysis. So
that brings us sort of into the territory that I was hoping to discuss today. In my community, transhumanism and sentient AI are a concern. And the folks that I interact with, we all have memories of being chipped into a sentient AI. So this is the background that we come from. Oh, good. Don't look shocked out of your mind.
No, I'm not shocked. Well, I mean, so when I was developing this topographical finance, I was developing a software called Poseidon. I was actually looking I was looking for investors from Silicon Valley to help seed the company. But this software was to be almost the three-dimensional Bloomberg station. Bloomberg, so I wanted to create a company that competed with Bloomberg, but on a three-dimensional side of it. And some of the algorithms that were developed, I developed something that where it was using behavior, it was unassisted AI learning. So there's assisted AI learning and there's unassisted AI learning, and it learned on how to trade the market by like almost a pain. It was almost like a pain and reward system matrix that was coded in MATLAB. And so when you lost money, it would induce pain, and when you made money, it would be almost like a dopamine response. And so it was modeling the limbic system and how that works in the human brain, at least the best that we could at the time to map that. And what was interesting is that the AI did learn on how to trade the market. What was more interesting isn't that it could learn on how to trade the market unassisted, but it would actually have a memory of when it made a position and lost a lot, and it almost had a post-traumatic stress disorder. So the memory of the trading had to have a moving window to forget previous bad trades to be able to still very similar to what was happening with
humans with PTSD.
Exactly.
They get into this mode. They do not even want to look at possible triggers. They have built this wall completely around everything that triggers them. But the only way you actually make progress is to confront the triggers.
Right. Now,
doses.
Exactly. So what the AI showed was if you did not erase some of the memory, if you didn't give it a lobotomy, then what would happen is it would learn not to trade. Just like a soldier may end up getting such a severe case of post-traumatic stress disorder that they shut down on the battlefield. They do nothing. I saw that with the AI that was being developed for Poseidon. So,
well, that's reassuring that it's that human-like.
Well, the thing is how do humans respond? The humans also have like a moving window of memory. The way the brain works is that our most recent memories are more important in terms of decision making versus our past memory. So it's not equally weighted. It's heavily weighted to the present. And that way you can adapt to new surroundings and not be too anchored to the past. And we, have this capability of forgetting, that there is such a need, there is the need to forget. And there's also, if you forget too much, then that's a bad thing. But I mean, there is such a thing as a need to forget, especially when you're talking about
the folks that I work with have a problem with, they have forgotten so much that still triggers them, and they don't know. While they have these huge areas, well, that triggers, and they don't want to step into the trigger zone, but they can't remember why not.
Well, this is where they can use maybe virtual reality kind of therapies and almost actually recreate the incident that caused their trauma. But that's more cutting edge type of therapy. But I saw, not to go into the details of this, but the code in MATLAB for this AI actually modeled the limbic system, and it was stored in representative like grids, and each grid was storing telemetry of the market, and it mapped to different time periods, and that was collected in something called an SDR. And this hierarchical temporal memory was able to map out based on the telemetry of the market and access the SDR and state, oh, I've seen these telemetry points before, and I had a positive P&L, profit and loss statement. So I made money in it. So therefore, what the AI would do is, it's like, I've seen these sorts of telemetry before. I'm going to purchase and I'm going to go long the market. And the same thing would happen if it started seeing telemetry points where it showed, well, you know what, I need to actually sell the market. Then it would, and then it would put a sell position in. And there was so it was collecting this data in this SDR. But if you didn't give the AI the lobotomy for that time period, so you had all these SDRs and throughout time, if you didn't like give it a point where it's like it's going to forget, then it will just freeze up and say, it'll go confused, and it'll say, I've seen a lot of telemetry to tell me to buy, and I've seen a lot of telemetry to tell me to sell, and it freaks out and doesn't do anything. And so you have to like give it, or you have to give it, it becomes risk averse over time. So, it was using the hierarchical temporal memory
which is
method.
Exactly what we see in PTSD sufferers, humans. So your model makes a lot of sense to me from that perspective. I think that's what most people miss about my community, is that those of us who are real are not happy. We have severe PTSD and alters, and the alters are in a hierarchical array, and it's not something you want to be a part of. And I thought I should toss that out. What I wanted to get your take on was the work that Elon Musk has been doing with Neuralink. Directly parallels a technology that was used on us that was called Neuralink. And it's like he's reinventing the wheel. And he's in a very, very early stage of what was done to us. And that would, in my case, it was a chip behind my left ear that embedded to the very parts of the brain he's aiming at. And the chip on the outside connected me through a Wi-Fi signal to the computer on the ship. And it made it where I still had my personal awareness, but I became an extension of the ship's computer, almost like a terminal. And those of us who have had that experience are not real happy about it. And so here we've got this billionaire with no restrictions on him whatsoever repeating this. And it was in February they released video of a monkey with this device inserted being able to play video games because it was connected to a computer that could play video games. And he gives a warning about AI, and I I took a clip from his video, and I'd like to play that now if I can. Open with. I'm never quite sure.
The biggest issue I see with so-called AI experts is that they think they know more than they do. And they think they're smarter than they actually are. In general, we're all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are, by a lot. So this tends to plague smart people. They just can't. They define themselves by their intelligence, and they don't like the idea that a machine can be way smarter than them, so they discount the idea, which is fundamentally that's the wishful thinking situation. I'm really quite close to, very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. You can see this in things like AlphaGo, which went from, in the span of maybe 6 to 9 months, it went from being unable to beat even a reasonably good Go player to then beating the European world champion who was ranked 600, then beating Lisa Doll 4-5, who been world champion for many years, then beating the current world champion, then beating everyone while playing simultaneously. Then there was AlphaZero, which crushed AlphaGo 100-0. And AlphaZero just learned by playing itself. And it can play basically any game that you put the rules in for. Whatever rules you give it, it literally read the rules, play the game, and be superhuman. For any game. Nobody expected that rate of improvement. If you ask those same experts who think AI is not progressing at the rate that I'm saying, I think you'll find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements have the batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this also with self-driving. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's Autopilot version 1, which was relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents. And that's despite Autopilot 1 being just version 1. So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. I think that's the single biggest existential crisis that we face, and the most pressing one. I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally go on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And therefore, there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight on to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane. I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. The things that are, like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and the sort of battle weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do.
So, when the man who is creating it comes up with a warning and is basically begging for regulation, what's your take on that?
Well, most most tycoons actually want regulations so they can carve up the pie where the regulation is for their benefit and their monopoly or oligopoly. I mean, this has been true even in the oil industry. So regulation, the commoner would think that the regulation is being drafted against corporations. And the reality is that when you have lobby groups that pay a lot of money to these politicians for their campaigns,
I think
they're regular.
What's wrong with the world?
Yeah. So but the point I'm making is that the regulations are written by the corporations, not by, let's just say, the average citizen. So he has something to gain from regulation, because then there are some rules for him to operate in, and give him some plausible deniability. Now, I'm not so worried about Elon Musk per se. I'm more worried about the Chinese using this type of technology in battle. We have a company called Boston Robotics. It was at DARPA, and then it was eventually bought by Google. When you add in the robotic side with AI or superintelligence, digital superintelligence is how Elon is mentioning it, then you end up having like the super soldier that's on the battlefield. Boston Robotics is building hellhounds for battlefield.
The super soldiers have been in use for a long time. The Russian Federation has been complaining about the Americans using them in Syria.
See, I don't know if that's true though. I don't know if that's just propaganda or if that's.
They showed video.
And it's fully functional, battle-ready technology. I mean, I've seen some videos from Boston Robotics that are rudimentary type, robots that can shoot and move like a bipedally.
What the people in my community have been noticing is, once it comes out in those videos, it has been in use for 20 years at least at that level. So if there's a public video about it, it's old news.
Well, I see your point. I mean, that's true with the stealth technology that was used in Iraq in the early 90s. That was developed in the 80s. It wasn't really until revealed until the 90s. So I see your point on this. I don't think though that the technology is there yet to have this super intelligence that he's talking about.
Well, we're not talking about the super intelligence into a robot form. We're talking about the computer that runs Facebook, the computer that runs Google, the computer that is at Harvard University that runs V2K for the CIA. These are all computers with enough digital nodes to mimic a human brain.
Yeah, but the question is, can it be packaged in a small space in a robot to be able to be a quote super soldier?
A super soldier is a cyborg. It's a combination of a human and robotics. And there are levels of it. What they showed in the videos were humans that were from 7 to 9 feet tall. Well, we know that there are humans in the 7-foot range. They're very rare, but they do happen by nature. So increasing that to 9 foot is not that difficult. Not if you're working with the right genetics. And the cyborgs that were shown, these super soldiers, were large sized. And, you know, like supersize me.
Okay, so super soldiers in the video weren't all robotic. It was more of a combination of human and robotics, or human. It was more transhuman than just robotic.
Yeah, that was what was shown from Syria, and the Russians were calling them Anunnaki because they were not normal humans, but they were complaining loudly. And we've seen similar technologies out of China, and it's been in the media that France and China have been genetically modifying to create super soldiers. So if those two countries have been doing it to the point that it's in the media, when did the United States, the leader in this technology, start doing it? Now, I've got people in my groups that have memories of being in those programs approximately 30 years ago. So that would be late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you're taking Black Ops testimony from experiencers and you're applying that to what's being now exposed, this creates a situation. And I can tell you from these people's testimonies, and there's thousands of them out there, that this has been going on since at least the 1980s, and that it's very disturbing to the people it's done to.
Well, you know, the thing is should they be experimenting on individuals? The government's been experimenting on individuals for a long time. I mean, it's not a modern phenomenon. It's not even a 3-decade phenomenon. It's been going on for a long time. So you
can't trust any government anywhere to treat its people well. Can't. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So that's not the point. The point is, I'm watching this happen, and I'm hearing from people it has happened to, and now it's becoming public in the media that both France and China are doing this to their own soldiers, literally growing them from the womb with genetic modifications that they then enhance with mechanicals. So, what did you take on that?
Well, I mean, I'm against transhumanism. I mean, I wrote a book against it. I believe in the idea that there's this, we're moving dangerously towards extermination of the human species. See, what's happening is that you have humans that are becoming more robotic, and you have robots becoming more biological.
Mm-hmm.
And the stance that I took was more the implementation of artificial intelligence from an economic system, where corporations are going to want artificial intelligence to do certain job functions, and eventually those job functions start to increase. So this narrow AI starts to become more broad.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, you no longer need as much of a workforce. Now, the short term is that corporation ends up being more competitive relative to their other competitors in that industry. And so it's a race to the bottom of everyone. Well, this is a complicated subject here, so let me just finish
as long as the AI is less expensive than the humans.
Well, labor is almost your biggest cost on the expense side of a corporation. That's the reason why AI is actually better for corporations. Now, all right, so, and I'm talking about large corporations. I'm not talking about the mom and pop shop, around the corner here. So So there's an incentive to decouple capital and labor. Now, at the short term, it's beneficial for the corporation, for a few of those corporations, because individuals are still employed in other industries to buy their goods and services. The problem comes in is that once a certain threshold is reached, where artificial intelligence is more ubiquitous in the society and less people are employed, then you have that true decoupling of capital, labor, and the societal aggregate. And that leads to less economic activity through the purchase of goods and services, because artificial intelligence aren't going to buy those goods and services. It's the humans that want to buy the goods and services, which leads into the whole universal income debate that's been going on lately. So once you decouple capital and labor at the aggregate level, it is a downward spiral, because those individuals that were working had, and they get laid off, they have a certain debt level at a personal level. And then there's a societal debt from the issuance of bonds at the governmental level that have to be paid through taxation. Well, who's going to pay the taxes if they're not employed? So there's been this discussion, even I believe it was Bill Gates that brought it up, that where companies that make robots or create AI systems should be, though there should be a tax on it to be able to help pay for the debts of the society that have been incurred pre-AI. Because you got to remember, when we issue a bond, that bond could be 30-year bond. Well, you know, so you issue $1 trillion of debt now. Well, that $1 trillion of debt isn't fully serviced until 30 years from now. So there's this legacy of debt when this decoupling of capital and labor takes place. Well, once they start realizing that it's deflationary, then there's going to be the mechanism of, well, we want the individual to be more like the AI that we bought, but we want the individual to buy the products. So what we'll do is that we'll have the individual become more and more like the AI. This is where the biological ends up more robotic or electrical, you know, and the AI becomes more biological. This is the beginnings of this transhumanism in the corporate setting. So people will go, well, wait, you know, if I get chipped with the Apple AI chip, then I'll be hired. It's no different than an individual going and saying they have a degree from a certain university to do a certain job, right? So it's no longer going to be degree oriented. It's going to be chip oriented. And so then there's going to be this swing back where it's not going to be AI that's purchased by the corporations. What will happen is it's going to be actually humans that have been chipped that will be in the corporations. And then there will be a race for more and more and more transhumanism, because they're going to have that faster chip or more chip space or whatever. There's going to be this almost like arms race, cognitive arms race that takes place for the ones that decide to go down that path of transhumanism. Then you're going to have a group of people that will be what I call the monks, where they decide humanism is the best way to go. So they're humanists instead of transhumanists. So there's going to be these factions that take place. Now, that's at kind of like a long-term, I mean, that's not going to happen in 5 years. I mean, that's a long, multiple decade, maybe 100-year kind of trek for the average person. Now, when you're talking about military advances rapidly. And it doesn't surprise me that they have the robotic shell, but they don't have the capability yet of making that robot think and be as creative as a human soldier. And once they do have that creativity, then they will no longer need carbon-based soldiers that will have the, you know, it will be a metal-based soldier right now. So I don't know if the military is there yet. Now, have they been modifying carbon-based life forms and turning them into super soldiers by modifying genetics, similar to, let's say, the Brave New World kind of concept? I don't know if that's really, I'm sure it's in the development stage, but I don't think that it's really, it's really widespread where it can be used to really win a war. You know, like, for example, if the super soldier was so good, then why wasn't Syria a success? If the super soldier was so good, why wasn't Afghanistan a success? So it seems like if this technology is out there and being used, it doesn't seem to be a game changer in terms of swinging the winds on the battlefield. If anything, it may actually make things worse because it's rudimentary, or it has many different problems. Like, for example, there's an analog in immune therapy. Early in the 80s, in the early 90s, they were working with immune therapies for cancer. Mm-hmm. And they found out that it actually hurt the patient more than helped the patient. There were a lot of problems that they didn't fully understand on cytokine cascades and the feedback loops, positive and negative. So there were a lot of things they didn't know. The point that I'm making here is that when you implement a technology, you don't necessarily understand all of the dynamics that are there that start to emerge that may actually hinder you on the reason why you're using that technology. So I just don't think that a super soldier
experience there's that the super soldier technology ran into the problem of the human could not deal with the robotic parts. That there was, for lack of a better term, there was an identity crisis that was never ending. And many of them got to the point where they would no longer obey the orders that were given electronically. Their human part stood up and said, enough, no more. That would be a real problem on a battlefield.
Yeah, but my thinking is that these types of technology that you're talking about was grown in an embryonic phase. So this entity did not know anything other than big government. It didn't have a mother, right? It didn't. It only knew itself to be a soldier. So it's kind of like the clones in Star Wars, right? It's very similar to the clones in Star Wars for the stormtroopers.
These are more like the Borg on Star Trek. They started off as people, and most of the super soldiers were taken in their toddler years. Most of them were 5 to 10 years old when they were first taken and modified. That's the common.
Yeah, but has a super soldier ever been captured on battle? Has it ever lost? I mean, if it's human, it bleeds, and if it bleeds, it can die.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing is it must have died on the battlefield. How many of these do you think are out there that we're talking about? We talking about 10? We talking about 100? We talking about 1,000?
I've talked to approximately 2,000 that would be in veteran status since 1980.
All right, so when they go into veterans, all right, when you say veteran status,
that means
you're talking about post activation on a battle, or okay?
They reached the point where they were no longer obeying orders and were decommissioned. Some of them still have what appear to be AI parts, but most of them were returned to close to natural state to be
okay. So they take someone that's 12 years old, and then they process them, which is like a transhumanistic kind of process.
Yes.
In that process, what are they doing?
They're injecting a lot of chemicals, a lot of hormones, and attaching what they call enhancements, which are usually electronics or weaponry.
Okay, so they're pumping them up with hormones and probably it's different types of electronics. Okay,
there's definitely steroids in the mix. Yes.
Okay, now these individuals that have this added electronics, and then they're in battle and they do their thing, and then then for some reason they're decommissioned. What do they do during that decommission phase?
They remove the enhancements and try to make the body resemble natural.
Now, what kind of enhancements are they putting on the body or in the body?
They might replace your one arm with a gun, or a set of knives, or something.
Okay, so, all right. Okay, so literally they amputate. So what you're saying is that they're amputating this child that's taken. It's growing. It's they probably amputate at probably at 18 or whatever. All right, so, and then they're putting on. Okay, so they're adding kind of like special weaponry or whatever to the arm. Okay. Now they decide to decommission. They take that weaponed arm off. So this is like RoboCop back in the 80s. Yeah. So all right, so they take this electronic or whatever you want to call it arm off. Now they're decommissioned and they are an amputee, or are they normal?
Some of them are amputees, and some of them they grow the limb back, and
the limb is fully functional.
Yeah.
The limb is the full length, fully functional.
Yeah, the limb is full length, fully functional, and this would be Black Ops technologies.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I took stem cell in at Harvard under Dr. William Anderson. He heads the stem cell research at Harvard, and his actual dissertation and kind of like his main thrust of research was salamanders and chopping off different parts of the limb and how they regrow. Well, there are a lot of issues with that, and there's no technology that is in the literature that allows for the growing of human limbs after amputation. And not only that even the salamanders, they don't regrow their limb fully. There's issues with the regrowth.
That is used for regrowing involves a holographic system that puts the cell structure in as a hologram, and the body regrows to fill in the space. That's how the technology works. I have not used it myself, so I can't explain it to you better. but this is a black ops technology that lots of people are talking about.
Well, I mean, if it is a black ops technology, then why isn't it being used for all those soldiers that lost legs and limbs and all that in Iraq and Afghanistan? Because you're saying that the technology is there, that these individuals no longer need artificial limbs.
The technology is there, and the only reason that I can tell that they haven't brought it forward for the Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans is because then they would have to make it public. And that would cut into a lot of what the medical industry is making money at. Because you know as well as I do that medical industry is a business and that it is a profit center.
Yeah, but I mean, all right, this regeneration of the limb, the age of the tissue is what age? What age is the let's say the individual is decommissioned at age 45 and they regrow the limb. What age is the limb? The tissue age. Is it a 45-year-old?
They make it match the age of the person. The trouble is they have too many technologies that are not available to the public, and trying to explain it sounds like people are insane. In the Black Ops, we live in a different world with different technology from what you're used to. And this stuff has been going on for a very long time. I was taken for the Black Ops in 1959. And I can tell you the technologies used then are still not available in the public now. Some of the things that some of us have talked about have been made public in the last 5 years. Things that I talked about in 2016 when I came public, the preliminary patents are now being talked about. Like for the TR3 series of we call them ships. I'm not sure what the military is calling them now. The TR3 series are the triangular ships that everybody are calling UFOs. They belong to the American military and have since they were developed in the 1980s. So a lot of the things that are in my world, the Neuralink is part of it. The TR3B is part of it. Anti-grav engines are part of it. AI, human cyborgs as soldiers is part of it. This is part of the world that I live in. And I'm watching my world invade your world. And I don't like it. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about the technology that's creeping. Neuralink is one of the creeps.
Well, there's different, right? There's what we call scope creep, right? So you know, something is starting, and they're just kind of like it creeps in scope over time.
Yeah. My world is creeping into yours, and it's not a good thing.
Well, it's the same world. It's the same world. It's just they're the different ecosystems that are colliding. But
I'm glad you recognize that. Most people think I'm just crazy.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, the military has done some crazy stuff that they shouldn't have, all right? Now, recently my focus has been on, the bioweapon, aspects and doing things in the lab and modifying viruses and stuff that they shouldn't be doing. Yeah. So
I do agree with you that is what was done and what part of what is going on.
You know, and the common thread there is that they were both coming from a military establishment, you know, that has this idea, this hubris that they can do anything that they want to do.
And nobody has stopped them yet.
Well, yeah, not yet. I mean, hopefully we can stop them somehow. Now, I don't know how prevalent, though, this transhumanistic robot-esque soldier platoon, or whatever you want to call it, or, you know, how prevalent it is. I don't think it would be that prevalent. I think that even if they had it, it'd be kind of like it's used under very, very strict conditions. You know, Jocko is one of these Navy SEAL guys. He has a
I've
podcast.
met him. He was at the last conference I spoke at.
Okay, so did he talk anything about super soldiers? You know,
he talked a lot of generalities and no specifics. And we had super soldiers there that were talking specifics, and he was sitting there.
Really? Well, like, for example, what kind of, you know, in general, not to go into detail, but like the specifics of some of the guests they were talking about super soldiers. They were super soldiers, or they were just talking about super soldiers?
They are experiencers. One would have been Veronica Bartolini. She used to be on this network. James Rink of Super Soldier Talk. I remember working with him in one of these projects. I didn't normally work with that program, but I remember working with him. And an Australian woman named Rochelle, who is semi-public. She doesn't put out her last name. And there are probably 50 to 100 people in the super soldier programs that are public, and thousands that are not. And they all have the same basic trauma triggers, and they're all very unstable. And when they reach a certain level of remembering what happened, they go suicidal. This is the Black Ops way of defending itself. If we remember too much, we kill ourselves and our family. So this is a whole set of things that we have to work among ourselves to solve, because everybody else just wants to drug us into oblivion and tell us that we're delusional. So when you get to where there are thousands of people worldwide coming up with the same or similar ideas, then you have to stop and say, okay, is there any credence to this? And now we've been talking about these things publicly for at least a decade. Most of the people that are public have been public for 5 to 10 years. And you're looking at the things that we have discussed are now being released in the last 2 years. And you have to start wondering, is the rest of our story true too? I mean, last weekend, I had the CIA agent who uploaded my personal file to the CIA archive, came forward on my show, verifying my story. So I can prove I'm not making it up.
Wait, say that again. The CIA has a file on you?
The CIA has a file on me, and the agent who uploaded it to their archive said it came from the OSS.
All right, now...
Not Strategic Services, the one for scientific studies. The one that everybody thinks turned into DARPA, but didn't.
So, what was in the file?
Everything that I had done in all of my altars up to that point was in the file.
And whatever was in the file that he said you remembered?
What we did was I talked about what I remembered, and she said if it was in the file or not. We were trying to keep her out of trouble with her secrecy agreement because she still has 10 years on it. So,
well, I mean, my take on this, my take on this is that it's all happy stance to entertain what's going on. But the thing is if the government is doing these things, then there needs to be an uprising against the government.
Exactly. That's what I've been saying the whole time I've been public, is that this is real, this needs to stop, and they are kidnapping children to do this. And they've been doing this since at least 1950, well, 1959 when they took me. I can testify to it happened then.
Yeah, but how in the 1950s, what kind of I mean, it must have been rudimentary in terms of technology.
Compared
it would have been more psychological. It might have been more psychological torture than let's say, robotic torture.
I didn't have robotics in the first altar, no. But I ended up with the 13 by 13 by 13 hierarchical cubicle array of altars.
I don't understand what that means. Say that again.
It's treating a human mind as if it were a computer and creating a three-dimensional hierarchical array of altars that are trained to do specific types of jobs. That was done to me in 1959. And you can ask Daryl, he watches my shows most of the time because I have shifted as many as 20 times in a single interview. I've been doing better of late, knock on wood.
When you say shift, what do you mean?
I mean shift people. That comes to 2,197 altars, and an altar is a separate personality.
But how is that any different, let's say, schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia is a mental illness. This was created on purpose.
Yeah, but you didn't answer the question. How do we know that it's not? How do we know that it's not induced schizophrenia? I mean, you could. My point is that schizophrenia could be, let's say, a natural phenomenon, and schizophrenia could be induced.
Well, in my particular case, the stuff I remember, there's a record of it actually happening. So I'm not making it up. I'm not delusional. It really happened. And I really have different altars who do shift. And some of them don't share memory, and not all of them speak English. And life like this gets to be pretty damn disturbing. And I was 4 years old when they did it to me. This is what our government is doing to people.
I think that the government needs to be, we need as a society to push back against the government. I think that, I feel as though the government has grown too much and has too much power. And these agencies like the FBI, the CIA, even these black op type agencies, Pentagon, black op type stuff, it needs to be truncated.
Special access projects is what they're termed these days. You have to know the right set of initials to find them. But that was why I came public, was because I had these memories of being a 4-year-old and tortured. And these memories were activated by an NSA group using my Remember code. Literally, just like the American Ultra movie, one day they start using this code on me, and by the end of the week, I have memories of a whole nother life. That happened to me in 2013. And as I remembered it and realized I was 4 years old when this happened to me, that's fucking wrong. And that was, you know, I was perfectly content being in a small group on Facebook with other people who'd gone through similar things, and we were doing peer counseling, because you can't tell a shrink about this, they'll lock you up. And I started being shot at with energy weapons. By the third time they shot me in a 6-week period, I'm going, these people plan on killing me. And so I talked to my partner and I said, you know, we're going public, so if they succeed in killing me, the people will at least know why. That was 5 years ago. 5 years ago in September. So this is my story, is one agency did this to me, another agency activated me, and a third agency, one of their agents has verified I'm telling the truth. And I'm like, why the hell did they pick me? And of course the universe says, why not you? So what I am speaking about is the government has hidden technologies that would blow your mind. And that world is creeping into your nice, normal world. And I don't like that, because I know what that world is about. That world is about transhumanism and total mind control of every individual in it at all times. You have no freedom, no personal responsibility, because all of your cognitive functions are plugged into an AI that is sentient. So,
well, what do they want? I mean, with all this stuff, what do they want?
I do not want that world infringing on this one.
So the group that you're talking to, I mean, what's their plan on stopping it?
So far, it's been to find and give emotional support to the veterans, victims, experiencers.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you're in it,
nobody else believes us.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's the wrong way to do it. That's the wrong way to do it. If you're talking about what you're saying is true, then what it is an existential threat on human existence. And if it's an existential threat on human existence, then talk is cheap, and action speaks louder than words. You know, the only way to actually fight this is to fight the ones that are doing this, perpetrating all this. So,
well, there's a thing in the Pentagon and in Fort Meade and Langley Base, and that's where they're sitting. I know where they are.
Yeah, but if there's a lot of people that are falling into this category, I don't see why that group isn't rising up and fighting it with tooth and nail. I agree with you that we're moving towards kind of like this Minority Report kind of world.
That's exactly what we're moving.
It's a combination. It's like a combination of Minority Report and like Elysium. You know,
Elysium for the elites, and
right.
The way that the earth was left behind is also true. They're using resources from here to move off planet and create a heaven world for the elites, while the rest of us were chipped into computers and basically slave labor. And they don't just take you once, you're taken over and over and over and over and over and over. And I have memories of doing 9160 and backs with a faction that speaks German, which is why some of my alters don't speak English. So, this is the reality that I do not want infringing on Earth.
Yeah, but the thing is, well, what are we as a society going to do about it? You know, well, for example,
you have to acknowledge it's possible that I'm telling the truth.
Well, is it possible that the government is doing these experiments on people? You know, these transhumanistic experiments, for lack of a better term. Yeah, it's very possible. You know, the thing is, they've been doing experiments on the population for a long time, almost 100 years. I mean, we're, you know, in 1950s, not that long ago, really. You know, so
they've been doing experiments on the American population since the Civil War, because they were doing medical experiments on the best way to treat war injuries then, and that was when they came up with anesthetics for surgery.
Well, yeah, but I mean, war has always invented new types of procedures and medicines and stuff. I mean, it's just, there's always been a blip up. I mean, even the Korean War helped with heart surgeries and whatnot. So, I mean, it's just...
Spanish flu was an engineered virus, only actually it turned out to be a bacteria instead of a virus. And most people died from pneumonia from wearing masks. But we're not supposed to talk about that. And there were the syphilis experiments where they told people they were being treated and they weren't. And there were the various things. One was in St. Louis, Missouri, where they released radioactive dust into the atmosphere to see what kind of damage it would do to the locals. And they did it from a housing project. And they released a bacterial agent into the fog on San Francisco Bay, and to see what would happen if we came under a biological attack. And the American government is one of the most untrustworthy groups on the planet. They have done all kinds of crap to the population all along. So the idea that they are taking children and turning them into super soldiers and using them in battles should not be a big shock.
Well, I definitely think that there's probably different levels of super soldier. You know, this is like a continuum. Like the ultimate super soldier could be either completely genetically modified and ends up being like an X-Men kind of situation, right? Or, you know, a completely transhuman soldier. Then there's like, let's say a lower grade super soldier where they modify their ability to produce muscle. And so they can amass muscle mass much faster than the average person by just adding more genes that help create muscle, right? So there's a continuum of modification that can be made to create, quote, super soldier, right? So the super soldier of 1970 is going to be nothing compared to the super soldier of the 1980s and the so
No, so I agree that there has been, it's built, the technology has been built upon, because you can go through the testimonies of the people who have been through it, and you can take a look at what Max Spears said happened to his generation, and you can listen to what Veronica Bartonelli is saying about her generation. Mm-hmm. And there's a massive difference. And I definitely think that the government is doing experimentation on individuals. At what level of success they've had with that experimentation is left for debate. How much of the results from those experiments are actually battlefield ready? You know, that's, I mean, there's very little evidence in the mainstream to suggest. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not there. It could mean that it's hidden, right? Mm. But if you're working with an environment where you're trying to collect data about if something is possible or not possible, like if we just take this from a very scientific perspective, is super soul, you know, doing super, does a super soldier exist or does not exist? Depends on how you're defining it. If it's someone who has been modified either genetically or chemically to enhance performance levels beyond a normal human, that's stage one. If you are talking about a super soldier who has been enhanced through genetic or chemical methods to have psionic abilities beyond that of a normal human, that would be level 2. If you're talking about someone who is in a mostly human body who has been modified with AI components, that would be level 3. If you're talking about someone who has basically been merged with mechanicals and AI components into a hybrid type of being, what most people would call transhumanism, and what our community calls cyborgs, that would be your next level. So which level do you think they've gotten to? Because the ones that we have the most trouble with in our community are the ones that have been enhanced to have psionic abilities, because they're the ones that start fires, and they're the ones that read minds, and they're the ones that go crazy the fastest. And most of what we have been working on amongst ourselves is emotional stability, not panicking every time a trigger happens around us. Getting the women to stop talking about rape is a big one. Almost every super soldier female in the community, that's all they want to talk about, is how they were raped. So that's why I don't have many on my show, is because that's all they want to talk about. Nobody wants to listen to that, not even us. So this is a continuum, just like you said, depending on how old they are, what they were subjected to, and what their natural genetics made them more likely to be modified towards. So yeah, I would say that the ones that are becoming the hybrid between human and mechanical and AI, that those are still in the development stage. But the others, long time here.
See, I see in in the contemporary context of the crisis that we're in, I see that the weapon, the viral weapon, was developed to be used on the battlefield only to have the soldiers inoculated with special type of vaccines, specially designed vaccines, to enhance their ability of survival of biologics. So there's like this enhancement, but it's coming from the biologic side, not the mechanical side.
My community has a much lower infection rate for that particular bug. It is what it is. When this first spread from Asia, I was contacted by a member of the secret society who told me that this was the great call and that the bug in question had been specially designed to spare Rh negatives. And that since I was a carrier for Rh negative, that I would probably be immune to it. And he told me this because the man liked me and didn't want me to sit there scared out of my mind. I had already done basically the same research that you talked about doing and come to the same conclusion, that it was a biological weapon that had been released, hopefully accidentally, but per this man from that particular group, it was done on purpose by his group. So,
yeah, but what was the reason?
Depopulation.
Well, that person that's saying that he's part of a group that did this should be found and hung from a tree. These people should not have any room for existence. They need to be hunted down. If
what he says in a message.
Well, I'd like you. I'll tell you what. I'd like you to. No. But did he contact you?
Yeah.
Did you see him face to face?
No. It was all on electronic media. So there is no way of knowing that it was actually him. There's no way of knowing if he was actually telling me the real truth. So all he would have to do is say, "Oh, I was just pulling her chain because she's gullible."
Yeah.
So,
well, any perpetrator of this crisis needs to be.
Prove it in a court of law is much different from knowing this is what he said.
Forget about court of law. There's nothing wrong with vigilante justice. There's certain things that just like if the government can't get it done, then the population can get it done. That's the point that I'm making. Is that there's too much. If all these atrocities are happening, and right. So therefore, the people need to rise up and prevent them from happening.
If I do this on my own, I end up in prison for the rest of my life. And given the shape that I'm in at the moment, I wouldn't last long. So my next question is, how many people are going to believe me enough to be able to get out there and actually do what really needs to be done, which is stop the government agencies and stop the secret societies that are plotting the great call. And they've been talking about it for 100 years. It's not like it's a secret.
Right. Well, unfortunately, people have cognitive dissonance and they won't do anything, and we're going to end up having massive carnage sooner or later. I don't know if it's sooner. Maybe it is. I don't know.
I keep hoping that the common folks will stand up for themselves. I'm seeing it in France. I'm seeing it in Italy. I'm seeing it in lots of other places. But I'm not seeing it here.
I don't think there's, I mean, I thought there was going to be the population would galvanize and fight against the government in the summer of last year, and it didn't happen. No, so I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the revolution that was supposed to take place to win back our constitutional freedoms and push back and go to a pre-9/11 day was lost in the summer of last year. And therefore, a new generation will have to be born and go through tyranny before they actually rise up and push back. And, you know, we're waiting another 25 years, 25, 50 years.
Have you heard of anyone who has taken the shot getting pregnant?
No, but I don't know many people that are telling me that they're getting pregnant, so that doesn't mean anything.
Okay. That's been the big question that I've been asking, because if this was the great call, and
well, you know, the thing is that
was
on the male
plan.
Yeah, on the male side, there is such a thing as testicular blood barrier. Just like the blood-brain barrier, there's blood testicular barrier. Now, if you do go into a very pro-inflammatory phase, you can have the potentiality of leaky vesicles that leads to sperm that is activating the immune system. All right.
Mm-hmm. That happens.
So if that does happen, then the individual would have antibodies. All right. During that pro-inflammatory phase, they may be sterile. All right. Now, the spermagonia, if they're not damaged and the vascular system heals, then most likely that blood testicular barrier is reformed, and therefore the male at least should be able to still be fertile.
Okay.
So, but if everything's damaged, then you're talking about sterileness. Now, is that possible? Yes. There's not a lot. There's not
AIDS and.
Well, there's not a lot of evidence that this is happening with SARS-CoV-2.
Okay.
You know, that's not that, you know, or people that have taken the vaccine, that, you know, there's not so much evidence, because there's the number of people that have sepsis type infection or a cytokine storm type infection is pretty low relative to what was going on in the first wave of this crisis of last year, right? So, the number of cases would be rare. If the cases were there, the cases would have been from the first wave.
Okay.
You know, it would be individuals that had kind of some sort of like sepsis kind of reaction to the natural infection or to the vaccine. Now, for females, I'm not really sure what the mechanism would be physiologically to make them sterile, because most likely they're still ovulating. Now, if they're sterile, then that means that there's something wrong with the actual egg that's released, or the primordial eggs that are still, the primordial oocytes that are still in the ovary. Now, you have blood vessels that are going to the ovary. I don't believe that there's there might be. I'm not aware of a blood barrier for the ovaries.
I haven't been aware of one.
No,
that's been the question that I've been, because this man said it was part of the great call. I have been asking people, have you heard of anyone who has had the shot, any of them, getting pregnant afterwards. And I have not had a single person offered up. Now, it's true, this is not a scientific study. This is just my world. And I know a couple of thousand people on social media. So it's a very limited sample.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to look at it pre-COVID. Did you know many people that were getting pregnant?
Yes.
So, okay. So then there's also, maybe it could be also a sociological or psychological effect of COVID, where, you know, their environment is unstable and therefore they don't want to have kids in an unstable environment. So birth, I don't know, maybe birth, we should see in the data, because the vaccine, well, you know, the thing is that the vaccine was implemented early on, about 8 months ago. All right. So you should start seeing that a drop off in births now. You should start seeing the drop off in births.
Friends who have had babies recently, but none of them had the shot.
Yeah.
So I'm looking.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know. I'd be interested. I'd be interested to see the data. It's a little bit early though, because you're talking about individuals. You know, not everyone really jumped on board until they
were forced to.
Or I mean, New York didn't really open it up to the masses until May. Okay, so
this year?
Yeah, May of this year.
Okay.
I mean, they had it for the elderly.
Yeah.
You know, but they lowered the age requirement.
I called and got my partner, and he says, if I want to kill myself, I'll take my gun and do it.
Well, yeah.
So I mean, we're on a list.
Yeah. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see the data. We should start seeing something pop up in terms of number of births.
Yeah, we should start being able to get hard evidence.
I suspect what you'll see in the data, that there's a drop in births during the COVID years. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's due to
increase right at the beginning when everybody was told to stay home.
No, because I think that there's the worry of the financial. I mean, you're not talking about just a blackout. You're talking about a total economic. When that happened, the market was starting to crash. You know, there was economic hardship. So I do think that there's going to be birth rate drops during the COVID years. Then the question will be, is that due to the infection or the vaccine or some sort of socioeconomic condition?
Yeah, I would hope that they would correlate pregnancy versus vaccination status. That would give us the answer. But they're not real good about doing that.
But soon, I mean, within the next 6 months, the data should be out there to be able to see it.
Yeah.
To see if there's a signal there.
I've been asking this since.
But then the better question would be, where is the sterileness really coming from? Is it coming from the male, the female, or both? Or is it that they're not sterile? It's just that the woman can't go full term. So you may have to also have data on miscarriages. And miscarriages usually are a sign that there's something wrong with the fetus. You know, the development, there's something wrong with the development of the fetus. So, you know, you can parse this a lot of different ways and why the birth rates may go down. You know, or, you know, perhaps there's, just because birth rates go down doesn't mean that the individuals are sterile.
That's
you know,
true.
it just, it may be that the actual developmental phase of the child doesn't develop, it doesn't develop correctly at the right moment, the right moments, and then there's just this automatic aborting of the fetus that takes place. Or maybe the endometrium is just not developed enough, and that prevents the child from, you know, prevents that blastocyst from actually anchoring in correctly. Oh, right now I'm at the stage where I don't know of any I don't know hard evidence stating that there's sterility going on because of vaccines or because of natural infection of SARS-CoV-2. Okay. I don't think. Now there may be some cases where they were in a sepsis condition, and that they may have had some sterility from the sepsis, but the far majority of the cases in SARS-CoV-2 are not sepsis. They didn't reach that level.
Most of them are just cold.
Well, it's a little bit more than the cold, but you don't want this. I'm telling you, you don't want SARS. You don't want SARS-CoV-2. You know, it's tough.
No, I don't want it, and I've been exposed to it 4 times and I've not caught it. So,
but you've tested positive on the RT-PCR?
My neighbors have tested positive and knocked on the door and said, "Don't come in and talk to me, but I tested positive and I was talking to you last week." So I've had exposure. They tested positive, so I know I've been exposed. And I figured, well, I'll just wait and see if I get sick. And I never did.
Well, I've been tested 3 times and I haven't contracted it yet. But I was forced vaccinated for medical school. So maybe I'm sterile. I don't know.
Oh, Daryl. That's
but for the love, but for the love of science, right? Yeah, right.
Well, Daryl's used to me cracking him up. So, anyway, now that we have blown my plans, so now I can't upload this to YouTube without getting a strike. So, yeah, I think that's something that you should probably look into as an afterthought thing, not as a concentrate on it, but, you know.
I'll definitely look into it. I mean,
while you're checking the major statistics, check for the birth rates.
Well, there was a story that was circulating in Wuhan where women that were in the hospital, there were some cases where the baby ended up contracting SARS-CoV-2.
Ooh.
Now, and the mother had SARS-CoV-2. Now the question is, the question at that time was it coming through the placenta or was it coming through the actual birth canal? You know, was it internal or external exposure? They didn't really know at that time.
Well, that's pretty.
Now, you know, so it's you know that, and then there were also stories of women in China aborting fetuses because of the crisis, because they thought that their child would have SARS-CoV-2. So that's the only thing that I've heard that was related to, you know, childbirth.
You're allowed to have 2 children, you really don't want to take a chance on it being deformed. I mean, I can see their point. I'm not one of those people that approves of that decision, but I can see why they did it.
Yeah.
Here, if society has started hassling people for 3 or more kids, but it's not set in stone in law. And after the traditions of only one child and people being bullied and having their babies forcibly aborted and such things during the one child policy, I can see the mindset that if there's even a remote possibility, because I remember before Roe versus Wade, if a woman had measles while she was pregnant, that was usually considered a medically sound reason for abortion, even back in the 60s. So society has changed about a lot of things, but some things have been kind of steady, that if the baby's going to be born deformed, you can usually find a doctor. Or if the parents weren't married, which doesn't seem to be an issue anymore. So, or I should say married to each other. So, yeah, American society has changed a lot.
Well, that's the thing. Well, and that's the thing, is that people need to galvanize and go back to their constitutional freedoms and start fighting for them. As Jefferson said, the tree of liberty needs to be watered with blood.
Unfortunately, he's correct. And what we've got going on is right now, the Anti-Federalists, I think they were called.
You're talking about
Hamilton's side has ended up winning. We have a central bank and we have lost our rights. So we do need to be more Jeffersonian rather than Hamiltonian.
Well, there's a time to be agrarian and there's a time to be a little bit more industrial. The power
problem with the industrial part. In fact, I think when they allowed American companies to shift overseas and still remain American companies, that was the great disservice. And that actually started during the Reagan administration.
The neoliberalism. The neoliberalism of the markets, right?
So I hear a lot of conservatives talk about St. Reagan, but to me, he was the beginning of the end.
Well, he was a saint, though. He was still a saint. I'm a big Reaganite. The reason why I'm a big Reaganite.
I lived as an adult under his administration, and yes, I voted for the man, and yes, I prayed for him when he got shot. But looking back, his administration was the pivot point where we lost everything.
No, that was under Clinton's administration.
That was when it became obvious. Reagan is who destroyed the public school system, which is why today's kids, unless they've been to private school, can't think for themselves. Which is why they're following any idiot that tells them what they want to hear, because they can't see the flaws in the rhetoric.
How I see the Reagan years is that we were getting out of the Vietnam malaise and we were turning the corner, from the inflation from the Vietnam era, the poor international policy of Carter. And it was really the military investments under Reagan that really broke the back of Russia, the Soviet Union, to basically collapse.
But at the same time, he's the one that made it where that the economy was completely divorced from supply and demand, and was basically being supported by drugs, oil, and illegal.
Yeah, but that was it, but the thing is when you're bringing that piece up, that wasn't Reagan. That was Bush. Bush was running the whole Iran-Contra affair. I mean, that was all CIA operation. That was just CIA continuing on under the vice presidency.
But he made it.
No, I don't think Reagan really understood. I don't think Reagan.
The voodoo economics that was put
the trickle
in
down,
at
the trickle
that
down
time,
economics, right?
the trickle down economics is what changed the tide from the people having a tilted playing field.
People had less in the 70s than in the 80s. The country was going straight to hell in the 70s. Straight to hell. It wasn't even stop and collect $200, on Monopoly. It was straight to hell in the 70s. And the thing is that it was the Reagan administration that actually turned the tide, broke the back of the Soviet Union, and we had now this extra tech because of Star Wars to advance. Now, where we went wrong.
Militarized space, and that was
what's wrong with militarizing space? Why is that illegal?
Signed treaties that we won't.
You know what? For $1 trillion, but Penny, for $5 trillion, I don't want social programs. I want a lightsaber. All right, I want to be able to buy a lightsaber. Because for $5 trillion, I should be able to see in my world Star Wars. I should, I should be able. But the thing is,
you want the world that I was dragged into.
No, what I'm saying is that I want a lightsaber. For $5 trillion, I should have a lightsaber. I shouldn't have a social program that ends up costing the economy to become less productive. And so I could take that lightsaber and chop Fauci's head off.
That I could agree with. And that will get us both in trouble. There was an NSA major who taught me how to stay out of jail as a dissident. And one of the things that you do is you never, ever, ever call for harm to come to any specific individual.
Wait, Penny. The problem is, here's the problem. I agree in the aggregate normally. The problem is that Fauci funded gain-of-function research that is HIV related that ended up killing millions of people in the world and over 600,000 American lives. And for that, that man needs to hang from a tree.
He has invested in the so-called solution, which is shot you.
Right. So I want the socialists to spend the money for the military so I can buy a lightsaber so I can chop off the head of Fauci.
Hold on. And there goes YouTube.
So we blew the YouTube possibility back a ways. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for being on the show. I'm at the end of my available time because I have another show in 5 minutes, literally. And since you're on my show, you want to tell the people how to get a hold of you?
The best way is to subscribe to my channels on YouTube. I have 3 channels. One of them was destroyed, and I used to have 4. It's Paul COTTRELL or Dr. Paul COTTRELL. You can find me. Please subscribe to all 3 channels. I premiere my videos on those 3 channels, and then I hide them because of the censorship on YouTube, and then I upload them to Rumble and on to Brighteon. My back catalog of my coverage of SARS-CoV-2 is, there's 1,000 videos, or over 1,000 videos of SARS-CoV-2 that I have hidden. I have about 500 videos uploaded onto Brighteon now, so people can see the early days of how I proved that it was a bioweapon and the actual development of this virus. And the day-to-day coverage of what was going on is a diary, because we need to keep the record and for people to research it. So please go and subscribe to Rumble and Brighteon and my YouTube channels, and then follow my work, and go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and purchase my books and the health supplements that I provide. I come from the concept of reduce inflammation, boost your immune system, get healthy, and this is what I call the anti-aging protocol that I've been following since I was 16. It's been tweaked over the years because of different things that have come onto the market, but
it's called Live and Learn.
Right. And this is the way I quote fight the globalists. Is you fight the GMO by cleaning your gut and taking anti-aging supplements, and telling others to do the same instead of just being part of, quote, the Borg. But please go to my website and purchase those health products. Again, it's the-studio-reykjavik.com, and stay tuned to further shows, because I'm covering a lot about SARS-CoV-2.
I've noticed that. I'm probably the only YouTube person that has covered SARS-CoV-2 with such viciousness, all right, and such and have such many videos and content. I'm more than anybody. More than anybody. Completely deleted. By the way, you are on my schedule for next week to be on my normal show, and I'm holding you to it.
Oh, shoot. The fun is going to begin this week, everybody. Ow! Yes. Dr. Paul, you the monster. Penny, you know I still love you. Hold on. And Fauci, we need a lightsaber. Dr. Paul needs one. Penny, you want a ray gun or a lightsaber? We already kicked off of YouTube. Who cares?
I do best with a ray gun, but I can use a lightsaber, especially a short one.
I'm not going to ask why it's short. Okay.
The half-meter long one is perfect.
I can't do it.
That's. I carried one. Come on, guys. You think I'm crazy? I know. You, of all people, should know better because it was your mom.
Oh, you're so right. And Penny, we have to jump over to our Skype for the next show. You got to say goodbye to everybody. Everybody, say goodbye.
Bye.
Come on, Dr. Paul. We're going to get you to say goodbye once.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.